Hi, I'm Parneet Jaggi, and in this series of videos, we are going to be talking about an author with a multifaceted personality, Charles Lamb. Now, when we talk about Charles Lamb, we see him as a British author of the Romantic age, the Romantic era, who lived from 1775 to 1834. And he was not just a prose writer, but also a critic and also a poet. And he is best known even today for the essays he wrote under the pen name of Ilya. He remains one of the most loved and most read English essayists of his times. Now, when we look at his lifetime briefly and what all he did in the field of literature, we find him as a kind of a father of English personal essays. His personal essays are informal, they are humorous, they are interesting, they are jovial, as well as very light in mood and vein. So let's have a brief look at his life. Charles Lamb was born on 10th Feb 1775 and lived up to 1834. He is best known for his book Essays of Elia and for the children's book Tales from Shakespeare that was co-authored along with his sister Mary Lamb. Now, this Tales from Shakespeare is a very famous abridged version of a selected plays of Shakespeare, which he has simplified and presented before the readers, simple enough to understand even for the young children. Now, if we talk about his childhood, he entered a boarding school for the poor people at the tender age of 7. And it was soon after he developed a lifelong friendship with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was a famous romantic poet of that time and also a fellow student of Lamb. So Lamb left school around 1789 and then he was hired as a clerk in East India Company and worked in that company, East India Company, for around 33 years. So we see he had a great influence of his friends and literary luminaries such as Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Robert Southey, William Wordsworth, William Hazlitt. These were the writers who were prominently leading at that time in the Romantic age, and Lamb was at the center of a major literary circle in England. He has also been referred to by the writer E.V. Lucas, who is also his principal biographer, who has written his biography, as the most lovable figure in English literature. So he was born in London, the son of Elizabeth Field and John Lamb. He was the youngest child with a sister who was 11 years older. Her name was Mary, and even an even older brother named John. So there were 4 others who did not survive infancy. So this was the kind of childhood that Charles Lamb had to see. Most of his brothers, sisters died in their infancy and childhood only, and he had to in fact look after his older sister Mary, whom we'll discuss very soon. Now, as we said, at the age of 7, he entered Christ Hospital. That was a free boarding school for people, for poor people, by genteel parents. He had his friendship with Coleridge. Then he left school in 89, and in 1792 he was hired as a clerk in East India Company. Now, in 1796, this important and historic event took place in his life when his sister Mary Lamb, in a moment of anxious rage, stabbed their mother to death. Now, an inquest found Mary temporarily insane. She was found mentally upset, abnormal, mentally sick, and she was placed in the custody of Charles. Now, after the death of their father in 1799, Mary came to live with Charles for the rest of his life. This companionship was broken only at intervals when the symptoms of Mary's illness recurred. so that she had to be sent to an asylum, and that is, asylum means the mental hospital. Now, because of the fact that Charles had to look after Mary due to her mental illness, he became her lifelong guardian and could not even marry the whole of his life. Now, Lamb's literary career began in 1796 when Coleridge published 4 of his sonnets in his own first volume, Poems on Various Subjects. In 1798, Lamb published his sentimental romance entitled A Tale of Rosamond Grey, and together with Charles Lloyd, a friend of Coleridge, he brought about a volume entitled Blank Verse. Now, by 1801, Lamb had begun to contribute short articles to London newspapers, and he had also started writing plays in an effort to relieve the poverty he and his sister Mary endured. In 1802, he published a blank verse play by the name of John Woodville, which enjoyed no success, of course, and his 2-act farce is again a kind of a comedy, Mr. H, was greeted by 100 hisses at the Drury Lane Theatre. In 1807, Charles Lamb and Mary Lamb, brother and sister, they worked together and brought out Tales from Shakespeare. This was a collection of prose adaptations of Shakespeare's plays intended for young readers. This book proved popular with both the young and the old, and the Lambs followed up the success with others in the same way. So we see this historic venture, this publication entitled Tales from Shakespeare, was so popular that after that there was no looking back in their life, and they were established successfully as writers. In 1808, Charles published his own version of Homer's Odyssey for children, entitled The Adventures of Ulysses. And in 1809, he collaborated again with his sister Mary on Mrs. Leicester's School, a book of children's stories and poetry for children. At their home in Inner Temple Lane, Charles and Mary entertained their friends at a number of late Wednesday evening gatherings, and this company included many of the famous authors of the Romantic period like Coleridge, William Wordsworth, Robert Southey, William Hazlitt, and Leigh Hunt. Now, when we come to the fall of his literary career, we find that he ended his literary career in the same year when this collection of essays, Last Essays of Elia, was published. So we have a very checkered career of Lamb, which was not so smooth, which was not so full of joys and successes, but was deeply affected by the prevalent disease in his family, by the frequent deaths of his brothers and sisters, and by the kind of relationship he shared with his sister, Mary Lamb. And they even adopted an orphan girl, Emma Isola, and they moved to London, and there, because both of them saw very weak health, so there was definitely a fall of literary productivity also. So we see that by the end of her life, Mary Lamb's mental attacks had increased so much that she needed almost constant care, and Charles Lamb was so dedicated to his sister that he ended his literary career in the same year. So we see that, of course, he had to face lots of depression and loneliness. He could not build up his own family. And 1 year later, the death of Coleridge, who was his very dear friend, this loneliness increased to such an extent that he himself died very soon after that in 1834. So we'll be taking up his very, very interesting essay, A Bachelor's Complaint, in the coming videos. Thank you for now.